Don't assume your healthcare provider doesn't want you to ask questions. Don't assume that they have no time. Don't assume that the question's too small or insignificant. Um, do the opposite. Remind yourself that you, again, have a right to information. It's your body, it's your illness, it's your family, it's your life. And to be honest, it really doesn't matter what the healthcare providers think about how much information you need or not. You just go for it,
Yeah.
really, and keep trying, as long as it's respectful.
Hi, I'm Cian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk about ways to put the human back at the center of care.
Waiting Room Revolution starts right now.
Welcome back to the Waiting Room Revolution podcast. We are in season 10. I can't believe it. And this episode, we're going to be talking about invite yourself, the key that you've been waiting for. Okay, well, let's welcome back Maggie and Kayla. Thank goodness for them on our team. And my dear colleague, Dr. Cian Xiao. So let's get right into it, guys. Oh, I forgot to mention that this season's focus is based on a deeper dive into all the keys because it's been a while since we've had them out and about in the world. And we just thought it would be really great to have a season where we go one key at a time, talking about what's happened, what kind of intel have we picked up about the key, and just to regroup around the 7 keys. So that's what we're doing.
Uh, Sammy, I feel like you have a lot to say about invite yourself. So I want to throw it back to you. What is this key all about?
Okay. I didn't anticipate you would ask me that. Just kidding. Okay. So invite yourself, which is the final key. It's the 7th key, actually, is really about the idea that people who are more respectfully assertive in their illness journey. What does that mean? It means people who can find their inner voice and whatever's on their mind, they feel comfortable enough to ask questions, or they advocate on their behalf, or have someone in their life who's going to advocate, like lean in and not just be quiet and good and passive and in the back seat of their illness journey. Invite yourself means move from the back seat to the front seat of the car so that you can drive your own illness journey. It's really about being empowered without a sense of feeling like it's more work. It's just really the more quiet and passive a patient and family is, the less information they're going to get. So we're really trying to encourage people to find their voice and invite themselves and be more proactive in their care journey.
How has this landed with patients and families when you've given talks? So maybe Sian, you can take this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really interesting when we go give these talks because there are people in the audience who are patients and families, and there are some who are, neighbors or friends who are like getting ready for when this might happen to them. And so I think people who are, for the majority of people who are experiencing it now, they find this key about inviting yourself very powerful because it is this sense, it's giving them permission to ask questions and recognize their role in the system and a way to reclaim power and address the power imbalance that happens in medicine. And our world is changing with all the technologies and Googling things and all this information. It's like information overload. So knowing that they can take that and how do you use that so that they can talk about what's important to them and how they find themselves in it. So I think for the majority of people, this is refreshing and it activates them. And I think that's what is powerful about these keys. They're actions that people can take. But I will say there's the other extreme of maybe that we have also seen that there are some patients and families who some people have a mysterious diagnosis or one that takes longer to get diagnosed, so they've already had to advocate, or maybe say parents of, medically complex kids. And so those parents naturally like know they have to come out and be more assertive, I would say. And so sometimes we've heard that they're like, well, we are already inviting ourselves. So are you telling us something we already don't know? Or, how does this work? And I think for that group, they don't need this key. They already know how to do this, right? These aren't steps, as we've always said. These are skills. And so they already have permission. And maybe that's just where understanding how the system works and asking questions and, that fine balance between being aggressive, being respectfully assertive is really important. And knowing how to, find the champions on your team and how to think like the system does so that they can work with you is really important. But we certainly aren't saying this is something that if you are already the kind of person who brings your voice forward, this is great. But there are many people who don't realize that they don't just have to do what the doctor says. So I think this is where we've seen the biggest change.
Sorry, Sian, I was just thinking as you were talking, yeah, because patients and families feel like they have to wait for the doctor or the healthcare provider to ask them questions. But patients and families need to know they don't have to wait. If they wait too long, they'll never get the opportunity because it's busy in the clinic. And sometimes the doctors are so busy, they might not want to ask questions because that opens a Pandora's box. So um, you shouldn't wait to be invited to ask questions or to speak what's on your mind. This is about taking the bull by the horns and just leaning into knowing that it is your right to seek information and you don't have to wait to be invited.
No, I was just gonna say, so these keys have been out for so long now. Like, can you think back to any stories of impact that we've heard from patients and families about how they've used this key?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because, like, in a way, every time patients write to us or meet us, they're finding their voice. I mean, they're saying that the book activated them to do something, and that's really the heart of Invite Yourself. But I just got an email last week, and it was from a friend whose father passed away quite recently, and that, we've heard this before, they didn't really have an understanding of what palliative care was and what the family could ask for while the dad was in hospital. And so that whole piece about, what is palliative care and when do I get it was sort of missed. But what she said, and I'm going to quote here, she said, I actually cut and pasted excerpts from your book to share some of the ideas with her. And I know it made a difference for that friend because she and her family interacted with the doctors and with her dad differently in those last few weeks they had with him. So it wasn't about whether they were able to use the P word or get palliative care from a specialist. It was about changing the conversations and the way they were interacting with the healthcare system and within their own family. And that's what Invite Yourself is all about. It isn't so much about raising your voice so you get whatever you want. It's about realizing that there's a different way to experience this illness. And so that to me is just another example that what we're really coaching in these 7 keys are just different language, different questions that you didn't know you could ask, and things that information pots that you could get that will lead you to have a different understanding and to use the time that you have differently.
Because I'm on Instagram, I get a lot of people messaging me, and mostly it's people who want to know how to ask. So there's one piece is knowing you're permitted to ask questions, but sometimes people hesitate because they just don't know how to formulate the question. And this is why I think our book and the workbook is so helpful because in the book and the workbook, we give people examples of if you're looking for information about your prognosis, this is how you might want to ask. If you're looking for information about what to expect in the future, this is how to ask. So it's sort of like a two-part thing. You have to be motivated to ask questions, and then you have to feel comfortable in the way that you ask them.
Mm-hmm. As someone who would not describe myself as assertive in any way, I find that this is my favorite key actually, because I think of it as a culmination of all the skills that you learn in the other keys.
Yeah.
And like for, I had just recently like a blood test and I didn't get, I saw I didn't get the results, and I was just waiting. I was waiting for the doctor to call me, because I was like, oh well, no news is good news, right? And then I got a nudge from a friend who said, no, you can check your own results. You know that, right? And I know that. I work with you two. I work with you three. But I had to think of, oh yeah, that's my kind of my style. Sit back, and then I
Mhm.
had to invite myself and call the doctor's office and really, try and formulate my questions. Like, and when I went in, I asked, is this how it works in your practice, and what should I do going forward if this ever happens again? Like, I had to really invite myself to that conversation. So I find that, it was very helpful.
I'm sitting in front of a window and it's a cloudy day, and as I'm just looking at the light keeps like shining bright in my eyes and then getting a little bit dark. But anyway, just thought I'd let you know the weather is partly cloudy today in Florida.
So,
Yeah.
one of the questions that we get from patients and families often is they're really scared about being labeled difficult. So, do you have any advice for families who really want to do this key and use this key, but they're afraid because they just don't want to be labeled the difficult patient?
Well, in my head, I think to myself, who cares? Like, just go for it. Like, what do you care if they say you're difficult or put difficult? In my head, I say that. But I appreciate that people feel vulnerable and there is this power gap. And so the worry about being labeled difficult is that you won't get the same kind of care. So that's what's behind the worry. Sienna and I often talk about that clip. From Elaine from Seinfeld, where she goes to an appointment and she's seen something written in her chart about being difficult. And it's a very funny clip. We sometimes show it when we're presenting. But yeah, so I guess I would just say it's not really what you do, it's how you do it. So if people are aggressive, then they probably will, rub the healthcare providers the wrong way. But if you are, like we said, respectfully activated, that you ask questions in a respectful way, and you also give the meaning behind your question, I think that really speaks to the heart of the healthcare provider. Like, doctor, I really would appreciate you giving me a sense of a timeline. Do you think I'm going to be around in the summer? The reason why I'm asking you is because I'm expecting the birth of my first grandchild, and it's that piece of it that will probably stop the healthcare provider and realize that, this is the meaning behind the question. So I would say don't worry about being labeled difficult. People don't normally get different care, even if they're feeling like they're difficult. We're trained to offer the same standard of care to everyone, but learn how to do it in a very respectful way, and you would be surprised that you'll get the answers.
Yeah, and I think what we've also learned from our guests and just from, talking with healthcare providers who are, part of the revolution is two things. One of which is learning how to ask open-ended questions is one of the best tips because you're not putting anyone on the defensive. You're asking questions that is not a yes, no, and the healthcare provider can use their expertise to sort of fill in all the bits of information you don't know. And so that's one of the skills that we teach in the workbook and how to, put all your questions and put it in a way that gives you like a more information. Powerful information, I think was what it was called by one of our guests, Aaron Gallion. And the other thing that we do in our workbook, which I think is also really helpful, is this exercise called renewing your vows. And we've heard from healthcare providers that when they meet patients who are activated or patients and families who are really invested in listening and paying attention and also taking some responsibility maybe for their own health or know that they want to have an active role, they like working with those patients. They like working with those caregivers because they know that they are part of an active team. And so asking questions about what's my role, what's your role, actually is welcome. We've learned from healthcare providers because it shows, what you're willing to do and that you want to, take this seriously, just like they do. And so I feel like that's very different than sort of, putting again, that power imbalance of us versus them. This is really saying we're on the same side, and what's my role, what's your role, and how can we work well together? And that framing, I think, is actually a change, and is a refreshing change for healthcare providers.
I can't forget when we interviewed a retired oncologist. This always sticks out in my mind. Someone who had worked decades with cancer patients. And I remember so clearly, Sian, when he said to us, had I only known that people wanted to talk about where they're at in their illness and what to expect, I would have asked them. I just assumed people didn't ask these things because they didn't want to know or they were scared. And I was worried that I would make them sad or depressed. So there's all these filters in between the healthcare provider and the patient and family. And then there's their natural styles of the way they do things. That can be a barrier between, communication lines. So don't assume your healthcare provider doesn't want you to ask questions. Don't assume that they have no time. Don't assume that the question's too small or insignificant. Do the opposite. Remind yourself that you, again, have a right to information. It's your body, it's your illness, it's your family, it's your life. And to be honest, it really doesn't matter what the healthcare providers think about how much information you need or not. You just go for it, really,
Yeah.
and keep trying, as long as it's respectful.
Yeah. And the thing that I learned that sticks out in my mind about this key, it's like practical advice is we know healthcare providers have a short amount of time, to be fair. They're very busy and they have something they have to get done. They have an agenda, but you have an agenda too. So you have to set your agenda or let them know you have some questions right at the beginning. Don't wait till the end. Say at the
Mm,
beginning, I have a couple really important questions and we need to make time for them. As long as you say at the beginning, then they know that they will set some time aside. I think that whole idea of knowing that you have an agenda too and they're not just a receiver of whatever they have to say really
mm.
changes the tone of an appointment. So I hope people can take away that one tip that I've learned from doing this, talking about this key.
It's how it's related to know your style. Like come right in at the beginning of a diagnosis, my style is to be quiet and to be shy. So I'd love it if you could once in a while ask me what's on my mind. Or my style, Kayla's smiling because that's her style. And other people might say, I'm the kind of person who gobbles up information. I feel so much better when I know what's going on. And so again, declaring your style, it's like giving the healthcare provider a chance to understand your terms of engagement, really.
We talked a little bit about power imbalance in this episode, and I think that is, an important point for this key. But I'm curious, like, what about people that are from underrepresented communities, like who might find it even harder, who have even more barriers to overcome? Like, how do they invite themselves to the conversation?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that question, Kayla. And I mean, I also appreciate that Sammy and I can only speak from our own experience, right? We obviously are not experts in, different cultures or religions other than the ones that, we come from. So part of the reason why I say that is because I think this to me, I think of it as every person is unique. People who come, we know that there are systemic barriers for many populations and communities. And in a way, that's why we're shouting it from the rooftops, because if you know this, you need, I hate to say it, but you have to work harder. You're going to have to do it earlier and do maybe think about this in a different way or more carefully because you know this is going to be an issue. So and there are things in the system that could help, but many people don't know they exist. So talking to other people from your own community of how they've navigated, I think that's a great piece. There are not specialty, but there are organizations that represent different faith groups or minority groups specific to health who might have counselors or advice or people. And in many hospital systems, there are translators or people who have expertise in, cultural sensitivity and things like that. And so asking for that ahead of your visit, or saying, this family member doesn't speak English, so we're gonna have to think about this is one of the things that are really important to our care, and that's a priority for us. So let's think of what we need to do to make sure we're trying to have this as smooth as possible. And I think knowing that ahead of time, and not, showing up and then declaring that is, appreciated for the health system, because I think they have these programs and systems in place. They want them to be used properly, and it's about just sort of getting it set up. Um, and I'll just say one more thing is, like, for example, we got this question a lot about people who are from this generation. Sorry, there are some older people who never got married and don't have kids. And so they're, I can't remember what the name is, like lone agers or something like that. Um, and they say, hey, how do I invite myself? Who's my ripple effects? But, we always say, you'd be surprised that if you really look back, you interact with many different people in your community. They may not be blood related to you, but they could be friends, they could be acquaintances, they could be different groups. And I was always so shocked that when we went to the UK, there was a whole group of these people, lone agers, and they met up with other lone agers and formed their own community. That's
I'm pretty
exactly.
sure they weren't called lone agers. That's
I
like the
was
Lone Rangers.
I can't, you know what? I went to a meeting and I can't remember what they called it. I'm gonna have to think about it. I'll try to remember it for the episode.
I forgot about those folks, but that was so cool because they told us how, yeah, they identify themselves and then pair with each other so that they're not alone. I love that idea, actually. But I think for people who are marginalized and don't have a voice, or, they have been disenfranchised by the healthcare system, they really need an advocate. So, like Sian brought up some good examples, but the idea would be to pair them with someone who can help them alongside their journey for sure.
They're called solo agers. There we go. Thank you, Sammy.
Oh,
Phew.
majors. Okay,
Solo agers. That's much better. Yes.
yeah.
Solo agers, paired up with other solo agers. That's just an example of a community that exists. And yeah, it's going to be harder, but if we really think about it, we are all complex people who have different needs and wants, and things that are important to us, and sort of finding that combination of how we're going to navigate this the best is, there's some work for each of us to do of who we want in that circle.
So all season long, we've also been inviting providers to take action. So what's the provider version of this key, and what are some of the skills that they might need to help patients and families invite themselves?
Well, I think it is every provider's responsibility to uh, invite their patients and families to have an open dialogue about what's on their mind. Like if my patient has been diagnosed with, let's say, Parkinson's, as a healthcare provider, I want to say to them, your questions are important. I'm busy and you might see me sort of rushing, but you have permission to stop me and to ask me questions. That I want you to ask questions because information is your superpower. Ultimately, this will go much more smoothly if if you make sure that you have a voice in this. So I think they need to invite people. Again, a healthcare provider needs to simultaneously try to assess the person's style. So if they can see that they're dealing with a Kayla, I'm just using you as an example, they might want to say, Kayla, I know you're naturally a quiet person, and but I know that you're thinking up here and you probably have questions, but please know that I want you to ask questions. So healthcare providers need to make it more comfortable, acceptable, and normal for people to ask questions.
And Sammy, what do you say to the providers who say, well, that's going to take up too much time?
Oh, well, we know for a fact that's what they think automatically, right? That all of this just sounds like a whole pile of work, and healthcare providers don't have enough time to do things to begin with. But the truth is this whole social movement is about preparing early. And when we are proactive as a healthcare provider or patient and family, ultimately, it takes much less time. You stay ahead 5 steps, and it's much less reactive, and little pieces at a time save time ultimately. So it does not add time. And we know that from our good friend, Dr. Erin Gallagher. She says, 10 minutes here and there is better than spending, 3 hours in a crisis downstream.
Yeah, and I think you have, if we think of the families and we meet them, of how much anxiety and stress that not knowing has, they live with that. They can't sleep. They're just thinking about that all the time because they just don't know, and they're waiting for the 3 months for the next appointment to ask that question. And so just thinking of how much quality of life and just how much time is spent on that. It's just unnecessary. But the one thing that I really want to plug that's in our workbook that we're pretty proud of is that at the very end we have a one pager that has your name, your understanding of your illness, what your priorities are, who's important to you. We call it the My Big Picture. And at the end of the workbook, as you go through, you can sort of tear that out or download that from our website, and you can show that to your provider, which summarizes this and hopefully can give them a really quick snapshot into who you are, what your priorities are, and change the conversation. Because we always say we may not be able to change the illness, but we can change the experience. And that's what I think we're really proud of. And I think that's what healthcare providers have a big role in that. And I think when they look back, doing this will actually allow them to really go back to the real reason why they wanted to do medicine, which is connecting with their patients.
I love that tool because if, for example, Kayla is, on the quiet side, working through our workbook and filling out this one exercise called My Big Picture at the end, it sort of becomes Kayla's voice. And so she can present this tool to all the different teams that might be involved in a future illness. And not feel like she has to find the words or the right moment, or, so a tool is a nice thing to use if you naturally, are shy about finding the right words and the vocabulary and whatever, or, having cotton in your mouth like I just did, stumbling over my words. But so I love our workbook for that reason.
Well, I think that's a great spot to wrap this episode up, unless there's anything else you want to say about Invite Yourself.
No, I just think that this is the final key, but it really could be the beginning one because it tells people that you have to get activated. And I think the key is what you get from that is information and time, because time is the one thing, the time to act differently and experience this illness differently. And that's what, we've heard from people has been the game changer.
And I would say practice makes perfect. So practice, 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 inviting yourself, and soon it will become part of your style.
Writing that
Be
down.
respectively assertive.
Write it down. Write it down.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. The workbook, Applying the 7 Keys for Navigating a Life-Changing Diagnosis, is available at select retailers now. Visit our website, waitingroomrevolution.com, for more details. On the website, you can also find free resources, event listings, learn more about the movement, and you can join our newsletter, which is the best way to keep up with everything Waiting Room Revolution. This episode was produced by Maggie Sivak, Cien Ciao, Kayla McMillan, and Shilpa Jyothi Kumar. Our theme music is Maypole by Ketsa.